Noctis Hollow was a war industry world at the edge of the inner shipping lanes. Its skies stayed gray most days, and the ground never felt fully still because machines ran below the crust in layered belts of heat, ore, and transport lines. Built into one of those iron ridges stood Iron Maze Academy, the training school that fed officers into the frontier fleets. For most cadets, it was a ladder, but for Darian Vale it had always felt more like a wall he was expected to climb, while other people decided how high he was allowed to go. He had spent 3 years there learning one lesson above all others. Talent mattered, but bloodline, sponsorship, and old family names often mattered first. On the morning Iron Maze Week began, he stood in a staging corridor beneath the Academy's Eastern Command Yard and kept his breathing slow. The final tactical trial would decide which senior cadets moved into live command preparation and which ones lost their chance before graduation. On a world like Noctis Hollow, one bad record could close every serious door. Darian knew that better than most because boys like Cass Brenner never let him forget it. Cass stood near the equipment gate with 4 cadets from old military families. They wore the same academy uniform Darian wore, but on them it looked inherited, while on Darian it looked earned the hard way. "Still here, Vale?" Cass asked. Darian adjusted the strap on his field pack. "You sound disappointed." A few cadets nearby laughed under their breath. Cass had a talent for turning even small moments into tests of rank, belonging, and humiliation. He stepped into Darian's path and smiled like he already knew how the day would end. "Be careful. Iron Maze has rules. It doesn't like cheaters." Darian met his eyes for one steady second. "Then you should be nervous." That got a sharper laugh than Darian expected. Cass's smile thinned, but he moved aside, and Darian kept walking because he knew the real fight had not started yet. The eastern staging hall opened into a broad chamber of metal grating, overhead rails, and cold white lamps. Cadets lined up by cohort beneath route displays while instructors moved between them with scanners and clipped voices. At the far end stood the sealed descent doors to the maze behind layered blast panels. Even from a distance, they carried the weight of ritual, fear, and reputation. Lyra Sin was already near the roster line, checking a slate against the deployment list. Darian knew her more by reputation than friendship, because she was sharp, disciplined, and careful enough to survive the academy without ever fully belonging to Cass's crowd. She looked up when he approached. Her eyes went from his wrist tag to the slate, and something in her expression tightened. "You're reassigned," she said. Darian stopped. "To what?" Lyra hesitated. "Secondary entry group. Lower route band." He frowned at once. "I was scheduled for upper band support lanes." "I know," she said. "That is what the file showed yesterday." That one word mattered. Yesterday. Whatever had happened to his route had happened late, close enough to entry that people were meant to have no time to question it. Before he could ask more, an instructor called his name from the inspection table. 2 security officers stood beside it with a broken route beacon lying between them. The casing was cracked, and the academy seal had been half peeled away. Darian knew exactly what it was the moment he saw it. The older officer spoke first. "Cadet Vale, this beacon was found in your locker compartment." Heads turned all along the hall. Cass did not need to say anything this time because the room did it for him. Darian stepped closer and kept his voice even. "I didn't put that there." "Of course not," Cass said from behind him. "That would be sloppy." The officer silenced the room with a raised hand. "No formal ruling has been made. Command will decide whether this was sabotage, theft, or a procedural breach." "Then check access logs," Darian said. "We will," the officer replied. "But Iron Maze Week begins now. Commandant Dorn has authorized a provisional path. You will enter under restricted observation and earn your standing through performance." On the surface, it sounded measured. In practice, it was a clean way to stain him without clearing him. Lyra spoke before he could. Restricted observation on a lower band route for an unproven tampering case is not standard. The officer turned to her. "Cadet Sin, your concern is noted," which meant it was dismissed. Darian understood the shape of the move at once. This was not just a random accusation thrown together at the gate. Someone had lined up the charge, the timing, and the route change, so he would step into the maze already marked. If he refused entry, it would look like guilt. If he accepted and failed, the academy could claim it had given him a fair chance. And lower band was not a neutral compromise. It was a worse route, the slower route, the route built to make a stumble look deserved. Cass did not need a conviction. He only needed Darian removed in a way that left no powerful family embarrassed. Darian looked once at the broken beacon, then at the descent doors. "I enter," he said. Cass gave a soft breath that sounded almost pleased. Lyra's face did not change, but something in it hardened. The lines began moving. Cadets passed through scan, received route markers, and were directed toward their descent shafts while Darian noticed his marker flashing amber instead of green. Restricted status. He also noticed something else that mattered more. The route map assigned to his group did not match the lower band layouts he had memorized during preparation week. That detail sat in his head like a bolt that had started to slip. They descended by lift in silence. Darian stood with 6 other cadets in a narrow metal cage, sinking through maintenance levels, weapon stores, sealed tactical decks, and older internal belts where the air lost its clean academy polish and took on the smell of heated iron and old filtration. One cadet beside him whispered, "I thought lower band started at deck 9. Darian checked the route marker again. It did yesterday. The cadet stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means this route was changed late," Darian said. "And not to help us." The lift stopped with a hard shudder. When the doors parted, the first section of the maze waded beyond in strips of red-white floor light, camera housings, reinforced wall plates, and quiet that felt too clean to trust. Commandant Selvek Dorn stood at the threshold with 2 instructors. He was a narrow man with a still face and the kind of voice that never needed to rise because consequences already lived inside it. "Iron Maze Week measures judgment under pressure," he said. "You are not here to look impressive. You are here to make decisions, preserve assets, and reach assigned extraction points." He spoke about shifting routes, delayed support, and penalties for tampering. Then he added one sentence Darian had never heard in any prior maze briefing. Lower route bands may experience dynamic closures beyond standard cycle. It was a small sentence and a bad one. Dynamic closures meant retreat windows could vanish early, rescue timing could collapse, and the maze could stop behaving like a test and start behaving like a predator. For the other cadets, it may have sounded like one more command phrase. To Darian, it sounded like warning disguised as procedure. Selvek stepped aside. "Begin." For the first stretch, it looked almost normal. Their cohort moved through branch lanes, crossed a sensor floor, rerouted around a locked service turn, and reached a split where one path climbed toward faster extraction timing while the other dropped toward older maintenance lines. Darian's marker ordered the lower line. A cadet named Roan muttered, "That makes no sense. Lower line loses time." Darian looked up at the ceiling panel above the split. "Fresh bolts. Recent work. Take the order," he said. Roan gave him a hard look. "Since when do I take advice from the suspect?" "Since pride won't open a sealed door," Darian said. They went lower. The corridor narrowed. The flooring changed from newer traction plates to older ribbed iron, and Darian knew for certain that the route assignment had been changed late. This section belonged to an older map set. Someone wanted him off the known board. A sharp tone sounded ahead. Then another. "The timing is off," Darian said. "What?" Roan asked. Darian pointed at the wall lights. "The closure cycle is early." He barely finished the sentence before the heavy door behind them slammed down hard enough to shake the corridor. Their retreat path vanished, and half the group spun around in instant panic. A second alarm pulsed from farther ahead. The floor arrows changed from white to amber, and Darian's wrist marker froze, then refreshed with a deeper route instead of a forward one. Roan swore. "That is not standard." "No," Darian said. "It isn't." Then someone shouted from the side lane they had just passed. One cadet had been cut off behind a partial shutter, not crushed but trapped on the wrong side of a narrowing gap with the next closure already counting down. "Help me," he yelled. "The panel won't lift." 2 cadets rushed to the gap, but their markers flashed red and denied override. Darian looked up toward the nearest camera. "Control, respond." Cadet separated in lower band corridor 7. "Open the shutter." Only static answered. Then even the static died. That changed everything, because delay was one thing and silence was another. The support channels built into active maze lanes did not simply disappear by accident. Darian moved to the half-sealed panel and dropped to one knee. The metal was still grinding lower in short mechanical steps. Roan stared at him. "What are you doing?" Darian studied the frame, latch housing, and maintenance seam, finding out if the Academy wants us to panic or disappear. He jammed his fingers under the access lip and pulled. At that moment, he stopped trying to pass Iron Maze weak and started trying to understand who had turned it into a trap. The trapped cadet was Darian Vale, one of Cass Brenner's louder followers, and fear had stripped all the swagger out of his face. Darian braced one shoulder against the panel and forced his fingers deeper into the seam. "Roan," he said, "come here. Get your hands under the left edge when I say." Roan hesitated. "Why me?" "Because if he dies there, we hear it in our heads for the rest of our lives." "Move." Something in Darian's tone cut through the panic. Roan came, then two others followed. Darian nodded toward the maintenance strip. "Jalen, feel lower. There's an emergency release under the seam." "I can't see it." "Use your right hand. Stop fighting the door and find the notch." The warning light dropped from amber toward red, while Darian held the weight as long as he could. Then Jalen found the catch, yanked hard, and the panel halted just long enough for Darian and Roan to wrench it higher. Jalen rolled through the gap a fraction of a second before the door slammed shut for good. The whole corridor rang with the impact. Everyone backed away at once. Jalen pushed himself up on shaking hands and looked at Darian like gratitude had become an unfamiliar language. Roan let out a dry breath. "You knew the catch was there?" "I guess an older frame would still have one," Darian said. "You guessed." "I was hoping to sound smarter after." That got the briefest nervous laugh. It died the next moment when the floor beneath them gave a low warning pulse. Darian crouched and pressed his hand against the ribbed metal. "The deck is shifting. We move now." They followed the only route left open. It bent down through narrow turns into an older technical lane with lower wall lights, tighter ceiling clearance, and exposed seams that made the Academy's new layers feel like a lie built over something older and meaner. No one said it aloud, but the group had changed. 10 minutes earlier, Darian had been the suspect, the one marked for failure. Now, he was the reason Jalen was still breathing. The route had changed too, because every trap was now pushing them deeper and cutting away the path behind them. The next trap came in the form of a floor section marked with worn hazard paint and lighting slightly out of rhythm with the rest of the lane. Darian slowed at once. "Stop," he said. Jalen nearly walked into him. "Why?" "Because the floor is about to drop." Roan frowned. "You can tell that from lights." "From the lights, the paint, and the fact that this whole route wants us dead." That was enough. Roan stepped back just as the center span dropped away and locked into a sloped trench lined with old rollers and magnetic rails. One cadet at the rear did not stop quickly enough. Her boots slid, the deck tilted, and she fell with one hand catching the side rail above the moving trench. Her name was Miratan. Darian remembered it, because 2 days earlier she had laughed when Cass joked that Darian might end up washing Academy floors if Command Track did not want him. Now she looked at him with terror and said, "Please." Darian went down at once and reached for her forearm. The rollers were already starting to move. Roan dropped beside him. "I have her other arm." "Good." "Jalen, take Roan's belt and anchor him." Jalen hesitated, then moved. Mira was slick with sweat and shaking hard enough to slip. "You are not climbing," Darian said. "We are pulling. Keep your shoulders loose." "I can't hold much longer." "You don't need to. Just don't kick." The trench roared louder. Darian and Roan hauled together. Mira slipped once, slammed against the edge, then came up far enough for Darian to hook her arm and drag her over the lip just before the far bulkhead engaged. She rolled on a stable flooring and curled on her. Sigh, gasping. Darian pushed himself upright and looked at the trench. This was not random failure. The maze was stacking danger ahead and cutting retreat behind. Jalen stared into the moving channel. "This isn't a trial." "No," Darian said. "It isn't." A side speaker crackled to life. Cadets in lower band corridor 4. Maintain assigned route. The voice was distorted, but it came from central support. Darian stepped to the wall unit. Control. Identify why lower route closures are running early. The speaker hissed, then replied, route integrity is within accepted range. Darian looked at the dead floor section. Accepted by whom? No answer came. They moved because standing still was the easiest way to die badly. Not long after, another blast gate dropped without warning, cutting the cohort in half and leaving Darian, Lyra, Jalen, Roan, and Mira on one side while the others shouted through sealed metal from the other. A wall display flickered. The console displayed a line that read, Rebalance Event in Progress. That is not a trial term, Lyra said. Darian turned toward her. You were not in this lane before. I was reassigned after entry. Same as you. By whom? I would love to know. Darian put a hand on the sealed panel, felt no give, and stepped back. From here on, we stop thinking like a class. We move as a small unit, and nobody outruns the person behind them. Lyra studied him for 1 second. You sound prepared for this. I am prepared for bad systems, he said. That is not the same thing. Jalen gave a bitter laugh. So now, we follow the suspect. Lyra turned on him before Darian could. We follow the only person who has kept 2 people alive already, unless you want to ask the walls for strategy. That ended the argument. It took the only route left open. It led through a service branch with older conduit lines and dead observation glass above, then to a crossway where a manual latch sat on a door that should not have existed inside an active maze route. Darian opened it. Beyond lay a technical chamber buried in shadow, broken training drones, old route markers, a cracked med bench, and bins of dead wrist tags from prior cycles. Roan turned slowly. What is this place? A room they forgot to erase, Darian said. Mira stared at the shelves. Why? Are old tags here? Darian did not answer, because he was looking at the far wall. Names had been scratched into it in small cuts, many half scraped away, but some were still readable with dates from earlier Iron Maze weeks. Jalen stepped closer. Those people washed out. If they had washed out, they would be in the records, Darian said quietly. Lyra found a dead console, wiped dust from the screen, and coaxed a local backup pulse out of it. The console displayed a line that read, Transfer Q archived. Open it, Darian said. It may not hold much. It only needs to hold one truth. The file list was damaged, but enough remained to turn suspicion into structure. Cadet identifiers, route deviations, deep evaluation flags, external disposition pending. Mira looked at the screen. What does deep evaluation mean? Darian answered because nobody else would. It means they took some cadets below the visible trial lanes and changed the label after. Lyra opened another fragment. No full names remained. Only numbers and one repeated line. Selection threshold confirmed. Jalen stepped back from the console. No. Darian read it twice, then looked at the scratch names, the old tags, and the hidden room that should never have existed. Early closures, reassigned routes, old lower systems reactivated, missing cadets stripped from public records. Cass's trap at the surface had only been the easiest doorway into a larger machine. What had begun as a dirty move inside one trial was widening into something older, colder, and built to last. This is organized, he said. Not side corruption. Organized. Lyra turned toward him. Then we need to get it out. Yes. Jalen shook his head. First we need to get out alive. Darian did not argue, because from this point forward survival and truth were tied together. If the Academy had done this before, no one who saw too much would be allowed to leave cleanly. Then footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. More than one set. Calm, deliberate, not frightened. Darian killed the console light at once. Lyra moved beside the door and peered through the seam. Cadets. 5 at least. Darian looked through the crack and saw Cass Brenner leading them, moving not like prey inside a broken trial, but like someone following assigned direction. One of Cass's cadets carried a route slate, and another wore a headset Darian had never seen issued to cadets. Lyra breathed out slowly. He knows where to look. Jalen's face changed. That means he knew more from the start. Darian's eyes moved through the chamber. One exit, thin cover, and no future if Cass sealed the outer door. There's a service shaft past the drain channel, he said. Old maintenance descent. It will not be on current route guidance. Mira stared toward the darkness behind the room. Down. It is the only direction Cass wants us to avoid finding on our own. Roan frowned. Or the one he wants to force. Darian nodded. Both can be true. Cass's voice came through the corridor, calm and close. Vale, I know you're in there. No one answered. You have made this harder than it needed to be, Cass said. Come out now, and you can still keep this inside the academy. Lyra looked at Darian. That line mattered because Cass was not speaking like a bully improvising cruelty anymore. He was speaking like someone promised cover. Darian stepped closer to the sealed door, but did not open it. You sound confident for someone who almost lost his own people in a lower route trap. A short silence followed. Then Cass replied in a colder voice than Darian had ever heard from him before. Some people are meant for command. Some are meant to reveal which doors should close. That told Darian more than any threat could have. Cass was no longer just trying to ruin his standing. He was here to drive him deeper. There is still one narrow ascent lane open to your left, Cass said. Take it alone, and maybe this ends as a mistake. Mira looked at Darian in shock. Cass had placed the blade exactly where it would hurt, offering him survival if he abandoned everyone else. Lyra saw it at once. He wants the group split. Yes, Darian said. Then another sound reached them, not from the corridor, but from below the room. Faint metallic banging, then a muffled shout. Mira whispered, There are people under us. Cass heard it too. Do not go down there, Vale. Those lanes are not part of your route. Let's settle the choice. Darian looked from the scratched names to the hidden shaft, then back to the faces with him. The ascent lane might be real, but it would save only him and bury everything. Else exactly where the academy wanted it. If I take the safe lane, he said quietly, what happens to the rest of you? Nobody answered because nobody had to. He kicked aside the drain grate, found the old ladder below, and put one boot on it. Cass hit the outer door hard enough to shake the chamber. Vadi. Darian looked back once. I'm going down. Not because it is smart. Because whoever built this expects us to leave people buried under their lies. Jalen stared at him. That is your plan? It is the plan we have. Lyra came first. Roan followed with a curse. Mira after him. And even Jalen climbed onto the ladder while Cass's team broke into the chamber above. By the time the door gave way, Darian was already descending into the dark. The old ladder dropped farther than he expected. The shaft walls were raw iron, and the air carried the stale dryness of spaces that had never been meant for public feet. At the bottom, a narrow ledge opened into a maintenance corridor with no guidance lights, no academy symbols, and no effort to pretend it was part of a cadet exercise. Lyra swept her hand lamp across the walls and saw observation slits, hardened viewing ports, and hatch frames without academy insignia. This was built to watch people. Not cadets, Darian said. Subjects. That word landed hard because everyone understood it. The corridor widened into a circular monitoring room with cracked view panels looking down into 3 empty, glass-fronted chambers below. One held restraint benches. One contained timing gates and sensor arrays. One had a lift cradle built to lock a person upright during movement. Mira took a step back. This isn't part of selection. No, Lyra said. This is where selection went after people disappeared from the official route. Darian woke a dead console on backup charge. The console displayed a line that read, Archived Observation Index. Lyra scanned the local files while Darian studied the chamber floor below and saw drag marks, old transport access, and the shape of a pipeline rather than a test. People came in, were measured or stressed or sorted, then moved elsewhere without ever rejoining the public maze. I found transfer notes, Lyra said. The fragments were damaged, but enough remained. Cadet identifier, maze deviation, transfer below threshold, route reassignment pending, external review deferred. Read that. One again, Darian said. Lyra did. Transfer below threshold, Darian repeated, which means they were not recorded as failed. They were moved, she said. Roan's voice carried more anger now than fear. Moved where? Farther down or farther out, Darian said. Somewhere the Academy could call off record. Lyra opened another file fragment tied to timestamps from prior Iron Maze weeks. One line remained readable. Selected candidates must bypass visible review. The room fell quiet. Darian felt the full shape of the system lock into place. Iron Maze Week had never only been about ranking cadets. It was also searching for something else. People who reacted a certain way under pressure, people who disobeyed at the right time, held a line too long, thought too fast, or broke in ways someone above wanted measured. Lyra looked at him. You knew something was wrong. But not this much. No, he said. Not this much. She studied him, then gave a small nod that meant more than agreement. The suspicion she had carried since the staging hall was gone. She no longer looked at him like a risk inside the group. She looked at him like the person she had chosen to stand beside. Darian forced open a recessed cabinet and found old badge tabs, broken route markers, and 2 data wafers in sealed sleeves. One sleeve had cracked with age. Lyra held up the intact one. If this still reads, it may hold authorization or transfer origin. Take both, Darian said. We do not know what will matter later. They left through a side passage because the main route ended in a dead transport seal. The passage ran into old maintenance alcoves where ducts crossed overhead and coolant lines sweated into narrow drains. There they found a brief pocket of safety in a repair bay with a manual door. It felt like the last pause they would get before the people above stopped pretending any of this was an accident. Lyra checked the wafers on an overturned crate. Mirrors slid against the wall to steady her breathing. Roan sat beside her, and Jalen stared at his own hands like he hated what they belonged to. Lyra broke the silence first. You could have taken the ascent lane. Darian kept watch at the door. Maybe. You knew it might be real. Yes. And you still came down. He finally looked at her. If this place is what it looks like, leaving would not have ended it. It would have made me one more person who walked past it. Lyra held his gaze. Most people would call that survival. Most people are allowed to disappear other people as long as the paperwork stays clean. The words came harsher than he intended, but he did not take them back. Too many names have been scratched into walls that should never have existed. He softened his tone a little. I do not need to be the hero of anything. I just want to help them erase someone and call it order. Lyra lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked back at him with a steadier kind of trust. I understand. That changed the balance inside the room. If Darian failed from that point on, he would not fail alone, because Lyra had crossed the invisible line between witness and accomplice. Roan pushed himself upright. Then we stopped thinking about this as proof for later. We need a path, a goal, and a way back up. Darian nodded. First, stay ahead of Cass. Second, keep the wafers alive. Third, find a line that still touches public systems. And if there isn't one? Mira asked. Then we make noise where they cannot hide it, Lyra said. Darian almost smiled. Almost. Then the repair bay speaker crackled to life. Cadet Vale. Cadet Sen, you have entered a restricted academy zone. Remain where you are. Darian looked up at the grill. Commandant Don. A pause. Then Selvek's voice returned, calm and thin. You recognize discipline when you hear it. Good. Lyra stepped under the speaker before Darian could answer. This zone is not part of a public cadet trial. No, Selvek said. And now that you have seen it, your obligation is to stand down. You reassigned routes before entry, Lyra said. You triggered early closures. You separated cohorts and drove cadets below the visible lanes. Selvek did not deny it. Cadet Sen, you are speaking beyond your standing. Then correct me. Silence followed for one measure breath. Then Selvek said, recovery teams are being deployed. Surrender all archived material and remain in place for retrieval. There it was. Not safety teams. Not rescue. Retrieval. Darian understood the hierarchy in full then. Cass and his circle had been the first layer, the hands that shoved, baited, and cornered. Selvek Dorn was the real hunting force behind them. The trial was over, and the institution itself was now moving to collect them. What happens after retrieval? Darian asked. That depends on how useful you remain, Selvek replied. The wall speaker clicked off. A moment later, the corridor lights changed from weak white to pursuit red. That was the point where Darian stopped thinking of himself as hunted by rivals. The academy itself was now trying to erase them. They left the repair bay, through a rear duct corridor, and climbed into a transport spine too tight for large teams to advance quickly. Darian chose it because every decision now had to buy time. At the next junction, he found fresh boot prints on dusted metal and small directional tags stuck to the wall. The academy still had current access to forgotten routes. Jalen saw them and went pale. They know the lower map. Some of them do, Darian said, which means every clean exit is likely watched. That forced the next choice. They could keep climbing toward known bulkheads and hit prepared intercepts, or cut sideways through older infrastructure where the academy had fewer teams, but more environmental danger. Before anyone could speak, a bright beam cut across the far end of the spine. Voices followed, older and more controlled than cadet voices. A recovery team. Back, Darian whispered. He led them through a side hatch into a cable passage that opened onto a suspended technical bridge crossing a vertical machine void. It was old mesh, narrow, and swayed even under careful weight. On their side of the span stood the group with the recovery team, closing from behind. On the far side lay the next hatch and the only safe platform left in reach. We cross fast and light, he said. No banching. Roan went first, then Mira. Lyra followed with the intact wafer hidden under her jacket, Jalen behind her, and Darian stayed last to watch the rear. The recovery team hit the passage behind them just as Jalen reached the warp center span. One officer raised a compact tool projector and cut the first support line. Not to kill them in the obvious way, to control the bridge. Run, Darian shouted. The span lurched. Mira nearly went to one knee, and Lyra caught her arm and dragged her forward. The officer at the rear called out, "Drop the archive material and surrender." Final order. Darian ignored him and kept moving. He reached the warp center just as the second support line burned through. The bridge swung toward the shaft wall. Jalen screamed. Mira lost her footing and clung to the mesh while Roan hauled her toward the far platform. Lyra got Jalen across. Darian was still short of the far side when the whole span dropped again and the recovery team surged onto the near end. For one instant, Darian saw the full problem. If everyone stayed on the bridge, it would peel away. If nobody delayed the recovery team, the officers would reach the center before the group cleared. They needed a few more seconds so Mira, Jalen, Lyra, and the archive material could get fully onto the far platform and through the hatch beyond it. He opened his mouth, but Roan knew it before he could say his name. He met Darian's eyes from the far platform and made the choice first. "Get them off," he shouted. Then he ran 2 hard steps back toward the center and drove a maintenance lock bar into the hinge housing on the far platform. The jam froze the bridge at a crooked angle and bought them time. It also trapped him on the exposed section nearest the recovery team, while the others gained the seconds they needed to clear the platform. "Roan!" Mira cried. He did not answer. He looked only at Darian. "Move," he said. There was nothing polished or noble in the sound of it. It was angry, rough, and immediate, which made it real. Darian lunged the last distance, caught the rail, and rolled onto the far platform. Lyra dragged Mira clear, while Jalen stumbled after them. And behind them, Roan drove his shoulder into the jammed housing while the bridge shook itself apart. "Roan, jump!" Darian shouted. Roan looked back once, furious more than afraid. Then the old hinge blew under strain. The bridge center tore free. The recovery team fell back in chaos, but Roan went with the broken mesh into the machine shaft below, and his shout lasted less than a second before the dark swallowed it. Everything after that happened too fast and too slowly. Mira screamed his name. Jalen doubled over. Lyra grabbed Darian's sleeve because the near side platform was already entering lockdown and there was no ladder. No crane access, no route down to retrieve Roan. There was only a void built by a system that knew how to make people vanish cleanly. Darian forced himself to move because if he did not, Roan's choice became meaningless. On the far wall of the platform sat a protected relay box tied into the hidden sector network. The impact had jarred its service cover half open. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, voice raw. "Taking something they cannot deny." He pried the relay core loose, fed the cracked wafer through the local port, and copied everything the damage system would let him grab. Transfer tags, route mirrors, hidden authority strings, and partial archive traces flashed across the tiny screen. The console displayed a line that read, "Unauthorized archive, mirror complete." It was not everything, but it was enough to prove that secret transfers existed and that the hidden lower zones answered to authority above the public trial system. Darian tore the relay core free and shoved it into his pack. Then he looked once more into the shaft where Roan had disappeared. No one said anything for 2 breaths because nothing clean belonged there. Finally, Darian turned away. "We move." The words tasted wrong. They were still true. He led the remaining 3 through the far hatch, just before the platform seal behind them. The maintenance spine beyond climbed toward cleaner metal, current systems, and harder opposition. They carried part of the truth now, but the price had already become a person. The hidden sector was real. The Academy was hunting them, and the road back up had only become harder. The slanted maintenance spine climbed in long iron angles broken by service doors and dead junction boxes. Darian led with the lamp low and the others close because grief without purpose would only bury more people. At the next bend, he crouched beside a damaged wall panel and studied its weak status lights. They were dimming and brightening in a repeat pattern. Lyra noticed at once. "What is it?" "Load cycling," Darian said. "These lower systems do not run fully active all the time." Jalen leaned against the wall. "Meaning what?" "Meaning the maze saves power by waking different sections in turns. Doors, scans, route lights, support lines. If we move through the weak intervals, the teams chasing us have to trust gaps instead of full sight." Lyra nodded slowly. "The system has blind breaths." "Small ones," Darian said. "But enough." That gave him the outline of a new plan. Cass understood public lanes, visible rules, and the kind of pressure built to humiliate cadets. Down here, the structure cared only about weight, timing, and fear. If Darian used that, he could make the hunters trip over the machine they trusted. He led the group through a cooling manifold where insulated pipes hummed overhead and no cameras tracked the lane. After 2 turns, they reached a sealed holding bay with a manual latch override. Then they heard it, a cough from inside, then another, then a weak knock. Lyra moved beside him. "Someone's in there." Darian put his hand on the wheel. "If this is bait, we close it and run." "It isn't bait," Mira said softly. "Listen." There were at least 2 people inside. Darian turned the override wheel until the latch released and pulled the door open on its warp track. Inside sat 3 cadets in poor light beside supply crates and an inactive transport sled. One was older in the way she carried herself, a senior cadet named Hessa Vorn, whom Darian recognized from tactical boards. Another was a lean signals cadet with a wrapped wrist. The third was barely conscious against the wall. Hessa pushed herself upright. "Who sent you?" "No one," Darian said. "We found the door." She studied their faces and laughed once without humor. "Then the lower sector is leaking worse than they planned." Lyra stepped in. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough to stop believing schedule time," Hessa said. "Maybe a day, maybe more." Darian crouched in front of her and handed her a water cell. "Move from where?" "From Iron Maze Week. Last cycle for me. 2 cycles ago for him." She nodded toward the signals cadet. The other one was taken from command screening. Not even a full maze run. That mattered because it proved the hidden program reached beyond one event. Hessa drank, then passed the water along. "Were you recorded as failed?" Darian asked. Her mouth hardened. "No, we were told our files would be reclassified. Then we stopped being cadets and started being thresholds." That was exactly the kind of plain truth Darian needed. "Threshold for what?" Lyra asked. Hessa looked at each of them in turn. "For selective transfer. People who think, under stress, disobey at the right moment, or hold a line too long get tagged. Some are offered black placements. Some disappear into hidden assignments. Some do not come back. Jalen whispered. How many years? Longer than my class, Hessa said. Maybe longer than yours. The signal's cadet introduced himself in a hoarse voice as Corin Pell. He was conscious enough to move, but not enough to climb quickly, and that made the next decision for Darian. We are not getting out alone, he said. We take witnesses. Hessa looked at him more clearly then. You think this can be broken from inside? No, Darian said. I think it can be exposed from inside before they close the walls. That seemed to satisfy her. They left the holding bay with a larger, weaker group and a sharper mission. Darian used the load cycle to move them through dim intervals, hiding them in old alcoves whenever currents surged through the walls. 3 times recovery teams crossed nearby lanes and missed them by less than a minute. Twice Darian doubled back through dead utility loops, so the live map would place them farther ahead than they really were. At a narrow junction, Hessa touched the relay core clipped inside his pack. You already have data. Not enough, Darian said. You have more than anyone who vanished before. Then I need living proof to match it. That was the new shape of the plan. Hidden records could still be called damaged or forged. Living cadets with matching accounts were harder to erase. From that point on, Darian was not just carrying evidence. He was carrying people the Academy had tried to turn into silence. The next major choice brought them to an old lift interchange carved into the lower structure like a wound. 2 shafts rose upward through the iron, crossed by a loading platform, a suspended service stair, and a side relay line leading toward current communications. Darian studied the overhead signs and the motion of the work lamps. The relay line gets us toward a secondary control node. The broad route gets us higher faster, but they will expect that. Lyra followed his gaze. Secondary control gives us what? A way to see where the hidden sector touches the public broadcast grid. Jalen made a tired sound. You still think like we have options? Darian turned on him. We do. 1. Ends with us sealed in a corridor and called non-compliant casualties. The other ends with the Academy hearing what it buried. Before anyone could say more, lamp beams cut across the far side of the interchange. Cass Brenner stepped onto the upper platform with 3 cadets behind him and a recovery officer near the control column. He looked down at Darian with relief more than confidence, as if he'd been losing grip on the script and was glad to find his target back inside it. Vale, Cass called. You always did make simple things ugly. Darian moved the others toward partial cover behind a cargo brace and stepped out just far enough to keep Cass talking. You brought help. That must be embarrassing. Cass's jaw tightened. Good. This ends now, Cass said. Drop the data, release the detainees, and maybe Commandant Dorn lets you keep some version of your future. Hessa laughed once from behind the brace. That was almost convincing. Cass looked down sharply and recognized her. Real surprise broke through the mask. Darian saw it and understood at once that Cass had expected files, maybe rumors, maybe a damaged witness or 2. He had not expected old evidence still breathing. He also saw the structure clearly now. Cass held the height, but his people were spread poorly. 1 cadet stood too close to the old lift lock housing. The recovery officer stayed back because he trusted elevation and current route logic. That was his mistake. This interchange still obeyed weight balance and manual release, not clean public control. Darian could see the weakness now, because the upper platform sat under uneven lateral strain from the suspended service stair and its old counterweight line. You think this is about me? Darian said. You were never the real hunter. You were only the hand that pushed. Cass snapped. I know exactly what I'm doing. Do you? Darian asked. Or did they just let you feel important while you fed people into a machine? The words hit harder than Darian expected. Shame, anger, and panic flashed across Cass's face in the same moment. I am done chasing you through scrap, Cass said. You were never chasing me, Darian replied. You were hurting me for people above you. Cass moved instinctively toward the side control post to secure the height advantage. In doing so, he crowded his own cadet near. The manual release housing and abandoned the center balance of the upper span. Darian had already seen the old warning tag on the far rail. The platform could not take sudden lateral load, while the service stair sat under uneven tension. Lyra, he said quietly. Now. She understood the same weakness a beat later. She shoved a loose maintenance trolley down the lower side rail, and it slammed into the stair counterweight guide and jammed it. The whole upper platform lurched left. Cass grabbed the rail. One cadet dropped to a knee. The recovery officer shouted for them to spread, which only made the balance worse. Darian sprinted across the lower interchange, hit the side ladder, and climbed toward the maintenance panel before Cass could reach it. He ripped the cover open and found the old release wheel. He did not need a full drop. He only needed the platform to shear off alignment. Cass lunged for him just as Darian spun the wheel and threw himself clear. The upper platform slammed sideways and locked 3 feet out of line with the service stair and main passage. It did not fall. It trapped. The recovery officer cursed and backed away. One of Cass's cadets lost nerve and retreated into the rear passage, colliding with the officer and breaking their line into confused motion. Cass hauled himself to the misaligned edge and stared down at Darian. "You think this wins something?" "No," Darian said. "It just stops you from being the loudest problem in the room." Cass tried one last play. "Dorn will close every upper deck to you." "Maybe," Darian said. "But you are not Dorn." That was the real defeat, not the skewed platform. The fact that Cass had been stripped back to what he had always been, a useful son of the right family allowed to mistake borrowed access for actual power. Darian turned away because humiliating Cass no longer mattered. The route upward did. He led the group through the relay line before the recovery team could reform. The corridor rose into cleaner, more current metal tied to the Academy's active upper grid. 10 minutes later, they reached a secondary control node tucked behind an emergency broadcast manifold. Unlike the forgotten chambers below, this room was live. Its consoles were locked, but the wall schematic showed exactly what Darian needed to see. Hidden sector lines fed into a ceremonial command network during Iron May's week, so the director's office could monitor the trial in real time. Lyra traced the route path with one finger. "This touches the main assembly channel. Only during public events," Hessa said. "Closing ceremony. Rankings. Commendations." Darian opened the relay core and matched its copied strings against the node access panel. One hidden approval tag appeared again and again. Director Mailer Thane. The room seemed colder for 1 second. Lyra went still. The director signed the deep transfer authority. "Not just signed," Darian said. "Approved." Repeatedly. That completed the upper picture. Selvek Dorn ran the machinery on the ground and wanted sealed lower sectors, no witnesses, and a clean sweep. Director Mailer Thane wanted the Academy's prestige preserved, even if hidden selection and buried cadets were the price. Jalen stared at the panel. "So Dorn cleans the blood. Thane keeps the portrait on the wall." "Yes," Darian said. "That is exactly it." Hessa looked from the panel to the corridor behind them. "Then if we run out quietly with this, they will call the records false. They will say anything that buys them time," Lyra said. Darian stood very still because the answer had become obvious. Quiet escape would not protect the missing. Private complaint would vanish under rank, denial, and procedural smoke. If the truth went up quietly, it would die quietly too. "There is one moment they cannot mute without exposing themselves," he said. "The final assembly, when the whole Academy is listening." Mira looked at him like she wanted to say it was impossible. She did not. Darian met each of their eyes in turn. "We are not escaping anymore. We're going up to the ceremony feed, and we are forcing Iron May's Academy to hear what it buried." No one argued after that. Not because the plan was safe. Because it was the first plan large enough to give Roan's loss of direction beyond survival. They climbed through upper maintenance routes with a relay core tight in Darian's pack, and the witnesses close around him. The metal got cleaner, the air changed, and faint formal voices began rolling through the walls. The final assembly had already begun. They reached a service hatch above a narrow support gallery running behind the main command atrium. Through the lattice vents, Darian could see the ceremony floor below. Cadets stood and ranked, blocks under white hall lights. Instructors lined the side platforms. At the far end, the command dais rose beneath the Academy crest with Director Mailer Thane in dark formal uniform beside Selvek Dorn. From below, the scene looked ordered and clean. That was exactly why I had a break there. Lyra crouched by the service node built into the gallery wall. This line touches the assembly feed, but only through the node lock. Darian checked the port, and the node still reads Hidden Sector Authority from the relay core. Hessa shifted Corrin's weight on the support sled. Then do it fast. They will have search teams on every access point by now. She was right. Even before the first warning tone rose behind them, Darian could feel the trap tightening. The lights above the gallery flashed from white to red. A moment later, the bulkhead behind them started to slide shut. Move, Darian said. They crossed the gallery at a run. Darian dropped to the node panel, jammed the relay core into the port, and forced the override strings through while Lyra read the live interface faster than anyone else there could. It is resisting outer channel access, she said. Can it be opened? Yes, but only partway. If I force a full path, the node will tag us, hardlock the support doors, and kill the window before you can speak. Darian glanced toward the far end of the gallery, where recovery teams were already appearing with compact shields and Academy tactical gear. Open what you can. Lyra hit the transfer sequence. The panel shuttered. The console displayed a line that read, Assembly channel partially granted. At the same time, the side shutters along the gallery dropped halfway, carving the space into broken angles and blind corners. Selvek had started sealing the section. Half granted, Jalen said. It is enough for image and sound for a short burst, Lyra replied. Not enough to hold the line for long. The first recovery team came through the far arch. Darian kicked a maintenance cart loose and sent it crashing into the lead shield pair, then moved left to force them to split around the half-drop shutters. That was the only way to survive. If the team grouped, they owned the lane. If they split, the architecture worked against them. Selvek's voice burst from the gallery speakers. Cadet Vale. Stand down. You are compromising Academy safety. Darian kept moving. You used missing cadets as inventory. You do not get to say safety anymore. The lights cut to emergency dim mode. Darian had expected that. He had spent too long inside the lower systems not to know what came next. 30 seconds, he called to Lyra. Then the shutters resync. She understood at once. Mira with me. Hessa, keep Corrin down. A recovery officer vaulted the first barrier and came hard toward Darian's position. Darian caught the man's wrist, redirected the momentum into the half-raised shutter edge, and sent him tumbling across the grating. It was fast, ugly, and practical, exactly the kind of action the hidden sector had been measuring in cadets for years. Jalen saw it and froze for one beat. Then Darian snapped at him. You gonna help? That broke him out of it. Jalen grabbed a loose locking bar and rammed it into the side track of the next shutter just as another officer tried to raise it. The barrier buckled halfway and pinned the officer's shield arm. For the first time in this whole nightmare, Jalen had helped open the next second instead of waiting for someone else to do it. At the rear hatch, another force hit the gallery from behind. Selvek had sent teams from both directions. Lyra looked up from a node. Broadcast path is open. Darian now. That was the moment the feed truly opened. While the teams were still fighting through the broken gallery geometry, Darian had the one narrow window he needed to speak before they were buried under steel. He stepped to the camera mast built into the support rail and hit the live key. The Academy emblem vanished from the assembly screens below. Then Darian's face appeared above the command dais, lit by the harsh red-white of the compromised gallery. Behind him stood Lyra, Hessa, Mira, Jalen, and Corrin on the sled. Dirty, tired, alive. That mattered more than any file. Darian did not waste a moment. My name is Darian Vale. I was sent into Iron Maze Week under a false tampering charge and rerouted into lower sectors that do not exist on public academy maps. The atrium below went still. Cadet ranks shifted, instructors turned, and Mailer Thane looked up at the screen like he had just seen a crack open in glass he thought was solid. Darian kept going. There are cadets missing from prior cycles. They were not properly failed, not properly graduated, and not properly transferred. They were moved into hidden evaluation routes under the maze. He stepped aside, and Hessa moved into frame. My name is Hessa Vorn, she said clearly. Senior cadet from a prior cycle. I was taken below after route deviation and never returned to public record. Lyra stepped up next. Lyra Sen, current cadet. I saw hidden transfer archives, hidden route logs, and command authority tied to those lower sectors. Then Darian delivered the blow that mattered most. This program was hidden by senior command. The authority chain includes Commandant Selvek Dorn and Director Mailer Thane. The sound in the atrium changed at once. Not shouting yet. Worse. Human reaction breaking formation. Mailer recovered first because men like him always reach for language before they reach for surrender. He activated the dais microphone. Cadets and staff, you are witnessing manipulated material drawn from unstable legacy systems. This is an unauthorized intrusion by distressed participants in an active containment event. Darian had expected denial. He held up the relay core. This mirror was copied from a hidden sector node tied to your approval string, Director. If I am lying, open the lower logs in front of everyone. Mela did not answer immediately. That delay condemned him more cleanly than panic would have. Below, instructors were no longer looking only at the screens. They were looking at one another. Selvek stepped to the edge of the dais and spoke into his wrist command line instead of the hall microphone. The remaining shutters in the gallery began dropping all the way to the floor. He is sealing the section, Lyra said. Yes, Darian replied. He thinks if he seals the gallery fast enough, he can cut the witnesses off before this spreads. She turned sharply. That traps us. It traps him too if the cycle hits now. That was the last piece. Selvek believed full closure would isolate the gallery before the story spread beyond repair. But Darian had learned enough inside the lower systems to know what hard seal during low power compensation would do. The gallery could not sustain full barriers, live broadcast load, and cross-deck pressure balance all at once. If Selvek forced the shutdown while the feed was live and the route locks were mid-cycle, the overload would not. Quietly bury Darian. It would throw manual control back through the nearest command ring. The shutters slammed down. The lights dipped almost to black. Selvek had made the decision himself. Seal the gallery, stop the story, and trust the system to obey him. Then every emergency line in the gallery and half the atrium below surged at once. For 1 second, the academy seemed to inhale. Then the fail-safe hit. The assembly floor doors sealed. The dais access rails locked. The manual command ring around Selvek station engaged and frozen beneath a wall of status glass. Lyra stared at Darian. You forced a command hold. No, he said. Selvek did. He tried to bury the witnesses. The overload tripped the fail-safe, and the fail-safe locked the nearest authority ring. The logic was simple enough for everyone below to see now. He had tried to seal the witnesses, and the system had sealed the command center around him instead. The atrium erupted, not into chaos, but into the disciplined kind of fracture that could no longer be hidden. Officers moved toward the dais. Technical staff ran override checks, and cadet ranks dissolved into knots of voices and turned heads. Selvek slammed his hand against the lock control ring and tried to force a reset. It did not respond until an external technical board released the hold. Even he was trapped inside his own authority cage. Mailer turned toward him, and Darian saw the first real break in the alliance. Selvek wanted the scene erased. Mailer wanted the institution preserved. Now, both had lost control in front of the only audience neither of them could safely intimidate again. The broadcast node beside Lyra began to overheat. Recovery teams could no longer reach the group cleanly because the same command hold had locked half the support routes around the atrium. Hessa let out a rough breath that sounded almost like laughter. He sealed himself. Darian looked down through the lattice at Selvek, trapped inside the ring. People like him always think the system will know them from the people it traps. Corin stirred on the sled and managed his first clear words in a long time. So what now? The answer came from below before Darian could give it. One of the senior tactical instructors stepped out from the side platform and activated a hall microphone. His voice carried with the weight of someone no longer willing to pretend. Command hold is active. No one leaves this assembly level. medical and technical review teams to the gallery, independent witness officers to the dais. Full lower sector logs are to be preserved immediately. That sentence changed everything because it moved the moment out of Selvek's private chain and into public procedure. The next minutes were still dangerous, but they were no longer invisible. When emergency technical crews finally forced access to the gallery from the outer side, they did not come as Selvek's private recovery arm. They came under public hall authority with med teams and 2 independent officers at the front. That difference saved everyone left standing. By the time the command hold was lifted, the story had already outrun the people who built it. The lower sector was opened under witness teams before Mailer could redirect the process. Archive recovery began at once. Hidden chamber logs were matched against missing cadet records from prior cycles. Hesse Vorn, Corin Pell, and the others were pulled back into official existence one name at a time. Cass Brenner was found not far above the misaligned interchange, cornered less by force than by the sudden collapse of every borrowed shield he had lived behind. Once the hidden routes were opened to review, his role shrank exactly as Darian had known it would. He had not been a mastermind. He had been an eager tool with the wrong kind of access and the right family cover. Dangerous, yes. Important, no. Selvek Dorn was removed from command, pending tribunal before the day ended. He did not go down dramatically. Men like him rarely did. He stood pale and silent while officers took his credentials and cleared his authority bands one by one. There was something fitting in that, because the machine he trusted most had finally processed him like a threat. Director Mailer Thane lasted a little longer, but not by much. Public denial might have worked against rumor. It could not survive living cadets, mirrored hidden authority, and a full command hall that had watched him hesitate when challenged to open the lower logs. By night cycle, his title still hung above the academy in the administrative sense. The power under it was already gone. Mira was treated for exhaustion and stress injury. Jalen gave testimony twice, once to officers and once to formal review, and each time he sounded a little less like a frightened follower and a little more like someone waking up inside his own choices. Hesse refused a med chair until she had personally watched her name restored to active registry. Corin slept for almost 12 straight hours after they brought him topside. As for Darian, the academy tried briefly to do what institutions often do when one person drags their shame into the light. It tried to turn him into a clean symbol before it fully admitted that it had first treated him as disposable. He refused the easy version of that. When an officer told him he had become the face of cadet integrity, Darian answered, "No, I just stayed where your records wanted people to disappear." The line circulated anyway. He did not attend the replacement ceremony held 3 days later. He did not want a polished hall, a revised speech, or applause from people who had looked through him a week earlier. Instead, he sat in a repair yard above the eastern ridge while Noctis Hollow's gray light slid over the iron. For the first time since Iron Maze Week began, the ground under him felt merely industrial, not predatory. Lyra found him there just after shift change. She stopped beside the rail and looked out over the academy towers. "They are still asking for statements," she said. "They can ask," Darian replied. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt suspicious or unfinished. It felt earned. After a minute, Lyra said, "Hesse is being transferred to review support as a living witness. Corin wants off-world placement as soon as he is cleared. Mira asked whether you always sound this tired, or if it is your natural style." Darian glanced at her. "And what did you tell her?" "That you save your charm for emergencies." That drew the smallest real smile from him. Lyra smiled too, gently, without trying to turn the moment into something softer than it was. Too much had happened for that. What stood between them now was simpler and stronger than easy comfort. Trust paid for under pressure. "You know," she said, "if you had taken the ascent lane when Cass offered it, none of this would have broken open." "I know. You still went down." He rested his hands on the cold rail. "So did you." She accepted that, with a small nod, then looked toward the administration tower where new review lights still burned through the windows deep into every cycle. "Do you think it ends here?" she asked. Darian took a breath before answering. The main fight had ended here in the academy, in the lower sectors, in the names brought back into the light. The lower program ends here, he said. That part is done. The cadets they buried are back in the record, Lyra said. Selvek is finished. Mailer is finished. Yes, Darian said. And the rest. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the far machine hum under Noctis' hollow surface. Then he reached into his jacket and took out a thin print strip from the relay mirror. One he had kept back not to hide the main crime, but because it did not fit the same pattern. Lyra frowned. What is that? A transfer request that never completed. For whom? Darian handed her the strip. At the top, under damaged routing code and an incomplete approval chain, one line remained readable. External archive file opened by off-world authority. Lyra lifted her eyes from the strip to him. This is different. Yes. It is not part of Selvek's program. No. Below them, Iron Maze Academy continued turning under new watch, stripped raw in one place and pretending normalcy in the others. The main wound had been exposed. The hidden cadets were no longer missing. The men who had buried them were finished. Rome was still gone. That truth did not shrink just because justice had finally started moving. Darian looked out into the gray distance beyond the ridge. That means someone else was watching. The Iron Maze story had closed where it needed to close. The buried cadets had names again. The machinery under the academy had been exposed, and the men who ran it had lost their grip. But this strip did not belong to that same ending. It was a loose thread from somewhere farther out, and it had survived the fire for a reason. Some truths are buried behind steel doors. Some are buried in files, in silence, and in the kind of fear that teaches good people to look away. But every so often, one person refuses. Darian Vale did not win because he was the strongest man in Iron Maze Academy. He won because when the system asked him to stay quiet, step aside, and save only himself, he refused. And sometimes, that is where real courage begins. Roan's sacrifice will not be forgotten. The missing will not remain missing, and the names they tried to erase now belong to the light again. But out beyond Noctis Hollow, one question still remains. If someone off-world was watching all along, then Iron Maze may have been only one piece of something much larger. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think, or if you want to see where that next shadow leads, please like the video, share it with someone who loves science fiction, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life, one world, one battle, and one truth at a time. And until the next story, remember this. A corrupt system can hide people for a while, but it only takes one voice to make the whole machine tremble.